Okay, I'm hoping to make just a quick little devlog, but I'm sure it's going to take a long time, which will cover some new features in the Ace Racers SP project. So let me go ahead and start the game, and then you can see it pops up here. And right now it's in windowed mode, but you can see here I can just switch it to full screen, or I can switch it back to windowed. And then actually, let's say I'm in here and I'm playing in the rock hopper test. So now I'm in this little arena. Oh, that music is too loud. Oh, and you know what? I want to be in windowed mode. So I can set that here in the any pause menu. Any vehicle. I can pop it to full screen, go back to windowed. So some things that are kind of new here in the power settings, you can, depending on the vehicle, the space drone is one of them, you can customize the rate profile. So you set the total max power up here, and then here your reverse thrust, you can turn it down. Your horizontal or vertical thrust, you can turn it down, and then you set the max torque up here of each individual, and then you can turn it down here, the pitch and the roll. So here's the thing too, is that you have two profiles. Profile 1, here my face is in the way. You have profile 1 and profile 2. So while you're playing, there's a button that you can hit to toggle through, and you can see it right here in profile 1 and profile 2 default. These right here are your rotation bars. So if I pick up some rotation, you can see I'm moving this direction and this direction for rotation. So it might help you know which way you need to throttle in order to cancel your rotation. And these bottom two bars are the roll. And I'm using the loader at this moment. So its roll is quite a bit slower overall. Alright, so switching back to the main camera. So let me switch here to full screen. Alright, so one thing that is different and kind of new again is the here's some new cameras here where you can adjust these whole-tide cameras. So there's player placeable cameras, and these player placeable cameras, let's see, I need to adjust these cameras. These player placeable cameras, I should be able to see them here. You can see one of these player placeable cameras right now. These cameras, what they do, I forget the buttons to switch to these player placeable cameras. Here's an example right there. So now these cameras, you can fix them into place in space mode. So when I switch to object placer mode, I can actually select a player placeable camera, and then I can, here's the camera there, I can place it and that'll move where that camera is. And then if I switch back to the game mode, so now I'm actually viewing that camera. And these cameras, you can pan them and zoom them. So these other cameras, those are tied to the placed camera. These other cameras, these are the hull tied cameras, and they're tied to the actual hull. So the world tied camera, you can see the rotation of this camera is tied to the world, but the position is tied to the hull. So I can adjust this position relative to the ship. And the next camera, and then of course I can see that camera. without actually being there. That camera will follow the ship position, but it'll maintain its relative world rotation. And then over here, these hull tide cameras, if I adjust this one, I can adjust this camera to be somewhere, and then I can adjust the rotation, and then I can set it up like that. Okay, so then if I go switch to that camera, it's going to be tied rotationally to the ship, as well as positionally to the ship. So these are, you can use them like this, where you're kind of using them as a third-person camera, but you can also use them, you can set them so that they look like they're kind of mounted to the ship somewhere. And you can get like an alternate view. So I can be flying around, and then I can switch to that other camera and get another view. And the idea would be that while you're using a replay, it would be a little bit more useful to have these cameras during the replay. But there is a problem with these cameras where they are tied to a position that changes every frame, and then what you end up with is it can be a little choppy during the replay. And I'm not sure what to do about that. The Unity game engine just kind of works that way. So some more features that are relatively new. If I switch to the main camera here, switch to space mode, you can see that I can just select from this menu any placeable object, whereas previously I would need to toggle through 100 or something items. So that's kind of nice. So here's also these input curves. So here you have the power settings, and you might want to adjust the power settings to make it easier to play. Or you might want to adjust the power settings to make it so that it flies like the ship you like. But if you wanted to still have the ship you like for high performance, but you still wanted to have it easy to play and low performance, then you can adjust your input curves. So if I have my joystick here, right, and when I do this, right, here we have an exponential curve, so that when I move in the middle area, it increases very slowly, so you don't get too much power right away, right? And then when you start to you want to go hard, you go to the extreme, then it'll still go up to where the stick will go, but in the beginning part of the stick's travel, you have a nice fine control, so you can adjust. So an example of this would be if I set up, oh look, I have one selected. Let's say I place something that I can dock to. I'll back up off it, and so now I want to dock. I switch to my FPV camera, and in my case I don't use the joystick input curves, but I have a high quality joystick. And additionally to my high quality joystick, I'll just pause the game really quick. I have a high performance joystick driver, a V-Joy serial feeder, and here I can actually control, I can do the same thing actually, I can have Expo, or I can control my deadband. I'll put that back to 0 and I'll just go ahead and cancel. So actually, in the config, if I go here and I go to calibrate, as long as my controller is assigned, I can calibrate. I can have some dead zone here as well, right? And I can also affect the sensitivity in a 0 point. So there are some things that can be done just inside of this driver. But if you use these joystick curves, right, then when you're wanting to dock and you need precise control just at the middle of the stick if you're going to barely tap it, then you'll be able to have less response in the middle. Because you need to line up just perfectly to that plus. And so there you can see my angle needs to be within a window, and you can see it doesn't have to be that perfect, and my position needs to be within a window. And then I can connect, and then I can fly around. Switch to one of these. You can see something. So you can see now that I'm connected, just changing the subject. If I use horizontal thrust, I can rotate a little better. But if I use the rotational thrust, it doesn't do that much for me. I need to use the horizontal thrust while docked to this crate. And there's no objects around, so you can't tell what's going on here. Well, I thought I fixed that where... I guess I didn't. So if I place a space station or something... and then I dock... Alright, so now that I'm docked, and you can see now that there's an object for me to be correlating to. So if I try to do this rotational thrust, that's my yaw thrust, it doesn't change that much. But if I do the horizontal thrust while I'm docked to that object, it'll change it significantly more. So you have quite a bit of a different flight characteristic while docked to a freight. So another new thing, you can see I have this export levels pack. This export levels pack here. So this is really handy. So now, it used to be that from inside of the loader test, for example, I hit the pause menu. Now I saved my games. You can see all these games I have saved in here. Alright, so that's pretty cool. So let's say I want to export it. Well, I can come here and I can export it, but man, you better remember that you need to load it before you do. Otherwise it won't export correctly. So once you've loaded it, then you can export that single level, and it'll just export that single level to the folder that the game is running out of. Or you can come in here, you can find a pack, and you can export it to that pack. You can type a new name, or you can select one of these names and it should override it. Okay, but let's say you've been playing for weeks and weeks and playing all these different levels, and you know that's pretty cool, but you don't want to go in, load, click, 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 click. Well, now you can just go to the export levels pack, and here you can select whichever scene the level you want it to be from, and it'll automatically select scene unless you type it, and it'll just, if you click this. So here, and then you can select the level that you want to save, and it'll put it here, and it'll also put it here. So if you want to change the name, then you can just change this name here. Then you select the pack that you want to put it into. And then if you change the name here, when you click export, it'll change it to the new name and it'll export it. But if you just leave it as what it is, then it'll just export that one with this same name. If you have multiple scenes with the same name of saved level, so I have that actually. I have a few times where do I have it? Okay, so in the post texture tall, I have default black white, and then I also have Lunar test small with courses default black-white. This is a little bit confusing because if you go looking in your folder, you'll only find one default black-white. So actually I can switch to windowed, and then I can probably show that somewhere. But so if I go to the default hoops here and then I find default black-white, you only see one, but actually because of the way that it's organized, it actually works to save it in both different places. So if you accidentally named two with the same name and you want to put them both in the same level pack, as long as they are from a different scene, you can see that again. The scene name is actually under that hierarchy. So as long as it's from a different scene, you don't need to rename it. It's okay. You can just, right? So here's all the scenes, the saves in scene, the pack, and the saves in the pack. But you want to be careful not to select something and overwrite it. So, but again, like I say, if I selected this one, or if this one was just already that way, but it's in a different scene, it will add it to that folder, but it won't overwrite it. But if it's the same scene and it has the same name, it will overwrite it. So you do want to be careful with that. And here you can generate an empty pack to start a new one, or you can type the name and hit open. I don't know, maybe your list is going to be so epically long. You know, some of these, I got quite a few here. So, but then back to the import levels pack. I don't know why that button only works the second time you press it. I'm not sure what's going on there. This one you still, you can't select which level is which. You just have to import the whole pack. And unfortunately, if you wanted to import a single level from the pack, then you could import from the pack. You could select the pack. And I don't have any levels in the pack for this particular scene, so there's nothing. Oops, let me go. Let me go to one where I think there is one. So, import from the pack. So if I select that, so you can see here, I can actually import just one in the scene that the pack is saved in, that the level is from. Okay, so that's already going to be very long. There are no, in the Rockhopper, which is the lunar lander vehicle, you don't have any customizable options yet. I'm not going to play with customizable options there. Nobody's asked for them. And the games that exist, they actually don't have that feature for lunar lander style vehicles. So I feel like maybe when people get really good at it, they'll want different flight characteristics, but until somebody does something like that, I don't see where that's ever going to come up. And there's also none of that action going on in the small vehicle. Although there is in the forward only vehicle. But because you can only go forward, you can only adjust the rotation. So a future plan that I have to make the game more playable on keyboard, and I'm not sure if this is going to work out, but I was thinking about this. So in here I have found, so here this is Unity. What script is it in here? So in the cams script here, space vehicle cams. Alright, so if I come down to find one of these cameras, snap look. Alright, so you can see here, and you probably can't see, that I have a basic filter, and I've talked about it in other videos. So the joystick input gets really bouncy. And what this basic filter does is it saves the joystick input over the course of 6 frames, and then averages it. So frames happen really fast, but it saves this input over the course of 6 frames and then averages it so that it stabilizes. So instead of the screen bouncing around a lot, well, I was thinking that I could use a similar filter with way more frames, like maybe 50 or something like that, maybe like 100 frames. And it would be quite a bit of rotate up, it would be quite a bit of text. But if I put that on the input filtering, so when you use the keyboard, okay, to get your input, it's really hard because you either have 0 or 100%. So if I put that into the vehicle control, which is not in there, then when you press the button, it would take 50 frames before you would reach 100% input. So if you hold it down, then your input would gradually increase as the average gets closer and closer to 100%. So by using something like that, then I could make it so that if you're just tapping, and then that would actually be something that in the game you could adjust on a slider. So then the input stabilization, maybe that would be in here, and then you would be able to adjust the slider so that you could control, if you're using the keyboard or a cheap joystick that barely has any, then the amount of time that you hold it within the space of maybe about a second, maybe less, something that you could adjust up to like 100 frames or 150 frames, or all the way down to like only 10 frames or something like that, then it would give you more precision with your control without you needing a really precise joystick, because if you barely tap it, then it doesn't have that high level input for very long, and you end up with the lower resulting input. So it'll be a lot easier for while using a keyboard or something like that to have tiny inputs, because you can hold the key for longer and it won't get to max. So I haven't tried to implement that yet, but that would be something that I imagine would be kind of crucial for the lunar lander style vehicle, the Rockhopper, because I perceive that there are probably more players who are interested in playing the lunar style vehicle with a keyboard than there are people who are interested in playing the space vehicle with a keyboard. And the reason that this is that there has been a lot more games that use the keyboard for this style of vehicle, either 2D or 3D, where players have certainly more famously used the keyboard to fly the vehicle. And the reason why that would be is that traditionally in games, the space vehicle is more responsive. So it moves much more quickly, to the left and to the right. Whereas the lunar style vehicle, just traditionally, you can make it either way, but the lunar style vehicle generally it flies like a heavier vehicle, so everything takes a lot more time. Just as a tradition, there's no reason physics-wise that you shouldn't have that much time on a giant spaceship. It's just that for gameplay, players want the spaceship to move really fast. But for gameplay, people want the lunar lander vehicle to fly just like the real-life lunar lander vehicle, and that had more limited thrust, so the response time is much longer. Alright, so that'll be all for now. Here's a song called Main Menu Music, exclusively produced for Ace Racers SP by Jonathan Pearson. And here you can see his credits. Alright, thank you very much.